He's not Lisan al-Gaib. He's a very naughty boy. So I got to see Dune Part 2 a week early, and not gonna lie, I didn't enjoy it as much, but maybe that's because I was literally boxed into the very corner of the theater where the guy next to me felt the need to press his knee against the cup holder against my knee. At least I'm hoping that was his knee. I had to get up 5 minutes in to tell one dickhead to put his phone away because, you know, there are people who can levitate above an entire mountain, but fuck that, let's just check your Twitter feed. Glad I had to miss that to tell someone to be fucking respectful. And also, people didn't go to bathroom breaks before the movie even started because people kept getting up every 10 minutes or so, blocking the view. Other than that, it was a great movie. I can't say I was as blown away by the epic, massive size and scope of this film compared to the first one, but I also feel like that's an intentional thing to experience this time around. Part 1 was an introduction to this universe being brought to the big screen for the first time in a good way, where you're just constantly sitting there during Part 1 going, wow, this is massive, this is epic, everything looks so beautiful. And then in Part 2, you're mostly sitting there going, what the fuck? Part 2 is about showing the uglier side of this universe, and honestly, it does kind of make sense. War is about to break, and both sides, whether they're right and wrong, all have faults that are worth emphasizing, but the tone is never too brooding or self-serious. They still film on real locations and in practical sets, which all look amazing as expected. There's a lot more CGI that has to be incorporated now that sandworms play a pivotal part in the plot. There are more battle sequences with explosion and debris going on. And maybe the best part for me, effects-wise, was Getty Prime, which is portrayed as this black and white planet unlike anything I have ever seen before. And also, Greg Fraser's cinematography, Hans Zimmer's musical score, which might actually be better this time around, and the sound design, all three of those components are integral to what makes the atmosphere in this just utterly insane that had me shaking or my palms sweating throughout a good chunk of the second half of the movie especially. And it really dawned on me when I was rewatching Part 1 at home. The cinematography, the music, and the sound design, all these things are equal components. One can't overshadow the other, otherwise the scene just isn't going to work. There is a lot more action this time around, and it is still good. I like that some fight scenes are more drawn out than others, but the flaws that some people started to point out on rewatch are still there. So many fights finish as soon as they're about to start, all for the sake of realism, I guess. That's the only explanation I can come up with. A lot of fights are still choppily edited, and because it's handheld camera work, you can still follow what's going on. Like, the fight choreography is always on display, and that's what makes them good, but I'd be lying if I said they should, like, cut on impact every single time. And everybody's complained about this, and so will I. They hide a lot of the violence and the kills through the PG-13 rating, and I genuinely don't understand why. Just because Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya are in it doesn't mean we have to cater to a teen audience, because the rest of the movie is very much adult. It fits the Star Wars for adult phenomenon that everybody's been bragging about this. So fucking embrace it. If you're gonna slit someone's throat, have them gush out the blood. That would make it a hell of a lot more awesome. It would make the 5-second fights totally worth it. But at the same time, like I said, the fight choreography is really cool. Even when there's no blood every time someone slits a throat, the kills get a lot more creative. The villain's introduction was extremely imaginative in a way that I'm going to explain later on. But what also helps is that when you know who's fighting who and the stakes are that high, it doesn't matter if you just get a glimpse of each other clashing swords. You're on the edge of your seat because you want one to win over the other. And that's the other great thing about this movie. The acting and the character development has gotten a hell of a lot better. Timothée Chalamet has a much harder job than he did the first one, where he has to transform from this passive, fish out of water individual and turn into this authoritative, manipulative, and generally unlikable human being. And I never thought I would say this. Once he does become Lisan al-Gaib, he's actually pretty intimidating. Yeah, like, really think about that. I'm a year younger than him, but just look at him. I could kick his ass. I think what makes it all the more tragic is that for the first 2/3 of the film, Paul is once again denying the fact that he could ever possibly be a messiah, and that's initially what makes the romance between Paul and Chani work, and Zendaya is given a hell of a lot more to do and does a great job as the love interest, but when Timothée goes to Fremen school, she's initially charmed by his humility, but she also sees people like Gurney, Stilgar, and Lady Jessica plant all these ideas of what he could be in the future. And it scares the shit out of her because she knows for a fact that whether he's coerced into being this leader or he chooses to be at his own free will, he can and will change into a monster. And it leads to a very interesting question that this film raises about religion and organized religious leaders. It postulates, well, what if this prophecy is true? What if he's able to foresee all of these different futures and choose which one is the right path? Is that still technically a good thing? Because even with your best intentions and with the best possible outcome, you're still risking millions of people's lives. And even if they're submitting themselves to you at your own free will, they're still being used as pawns. And it's really interesting how many of them are willing to put up with it just to accomplish their own selfish needs. And as for the leaders who do have power of their own, like the three that I had just mentioned, they do whatever they possibly can in order to justify this prophecy's existence, but they're never unlikable because they do have enemies that pose a legit threat to them. They are being oppressed in a certain way, and they are trying to fight for their own liberty. And you really get the sense that these people legitimately believe that they're doing the right thing, especially when it comes down to Javier Bardem as the most openly zealot of the three of them. He has some comedic moments that didn't always work for me. It was kind of jarring seeing what was such a stoic and serious man in the first one all of a sudden have this lighter sense of humor, but I get it. We're being transported into his world where he's much more comfortable and relaxed. And not gonna lie, there were a couple of jokes that definitely worked for me. One, I swear to God, is a Life of Brian reference because it's just that blatantly obvious. Only the true Lisan al-Gaib would deny his divinity. What? Well, what choice does that leave me? He does a good job at persuading people of his beliefs and how they turn out to be true without ever forcing his opinions on others. I cannot say the exact same thing about Rebecca Ferguson as Lady Jessica because, wow, I said in my review of the first movie that she was my favorite character for how she played both sides for the survival of her family. That ship has totally sailed. Most of the scenes told from her point of view turn into this psychedelic body horror that had me shaking, or at one point, it felt like I got stabbed in the heart for how suddenly she used the voice to just strike fear and force people to do her own bidding. She has these moments where she's talking to a voice that only she can hear, and they're plotting how to pull certain strings for the future of Paul, but again, from what she sees within her own visions, she legitimately believes that she's bringing peace and freedom to a certain galaxy, but you also get the sense that she takes a lot of pride and validation in having the fact that she conceived a messiah, that this was all entirely her idea to create this child with that intended goal. She was a fucking psychopath, but nowhere near as much as Austin Butler. He was easily my favorite part of this entire movie. I mean, his costume, the makeup and prosthetics, his mannerisms, they were all just so flawless. And I like that he is technically the charismatic sociopath that you've seen in other movies, but what was distinct about him is just how open he is about his true intentions and how he takes shit from absolutely no one. It doesn't matter how high or above the food chain you are compared to him, he will openly say, if you piss me off, I will kill you, and I won't even flinch. And a lot of people just respect how courageous and confident he is. His introduction is in this gladiator ring, and he is so convinced that he's the greatest warrior ever. He turns his shield off to make it a fair fight because he knows for a fact he's gonna whoop their asses. And I do like that he's not full-blown over the top like Bautista is, and again, I'll get into that later on. And I also gotta give credit to Léa Seydoux. Even though her role is more of an extended cameo, she leaves a huge impression as this slimy but also seductive Bene Gesserit who, even though she repeats a couple things from the first film, she brings her own spin to it. She's kind of a polar opposite of Charlotte Rampling from the first one in the best possible way. Now, I'd be lying if I said the entire cast was put to good use. Even actors who I thought were screwed over in the first one, most of them do get pivotal plot points in the second, but a couple of them still get screwed over. A couple of them even disappear because it's clear as day that whether it was because of a script rewrite or the studio told them to, certain scenes were trimmed down, and this was obviously supposed to be a 3-hour movie. For example, Tim Blake Nelson was announced to be in this, and he is in the movie. as a special thanks during the credits. A character I really thought was going to get more screen time and a much better character this time around was Dave Bautista as Robin, and he does technically have more scenes, but it plays to Bautista's weaknesses as an actor. He spends a lot more of the film just throwing tantrums and beating the shit out of his own men, when it would have been much more intimidating as a villain to beat the shit out of the heroes, the people that we're rooting for. Like, he has this machete and this whip that he teases the entire time, but it's never put to good use. I can't say that he has any bad scenes. He has, like, one good fight on an ornithopter, but it wasn't enough to save anything. But what really blew my mind was just how underutilized Christopher Walken and Florence Pugh especially, they just went to waste in this film. I mean, Christopher Walken as the Emperor, that's literally the full gist of his character. I swear they just casted him in this so they could say, oh look, Christopher Walken is the villain. That's instantly going to be entertaining. Well, no, because for the first half of the film, he just sits there in silence and looks kind of bored out of his mind. He does have one good speech towards the end of the film, and honestly, if it was just that one scene and they were building up the Emperor's presence and they made him dress like an emperor because the costumes on him are surprisingly very bland, if that speech was his one scene, it might have been worth it. But what's even more disappointing is he doesn't even get to chew up the scenery. He actually sounds kind of dull. And look, I love Florence Pugh, but why was she in this? She really serves no purpose. Most of the time, she's just standing there in these... I'm probably going to get shit for saying this, but those are really ugly outfits, even when it comes to sci-fi. Like, what the fuck is that even supposed to be? Okay, so despite some pacing issues, the fact that some actors get screwed over more than others, and again, like, quit being realistic with the action sequences. We want to see people duke it out on a huge canvas. Outside of all those things, everything that worked about part 1 is expanded upon in part 2. The mythology, the themes, the performances, the cinematography, the musical score, the sound design. Everything is just dialed up to 11 in regards to making it more of an epic suspense thriller as opposed to an action movie. And you know what? As far as it goes, I'm definitely going to see this twice, maybe even 3 times. And if anything I said in this I didn't like becomes better, you guys will be the first ones to know. So it really goes without saying, check out Dune Part 2 when it comes to you in theaters. Guys, thanks as always for watching. If you have seen it early like I have, let me know in the comments below what you thought of Part 2. Be sure to stay tuned for more reviews. Be sure to check me out on Patreon and buy me a coffee. And be sure to like and subscribe. Take care.